The morning Miles Calloway made a joke that wasn't a joke. He had no idea that the next 48 hours would dismantle 12 years of comfortable distance and show him everything that had been sitting in plain sight the whole time. Miles was 37. He designed structural drawings for a mid-sized civil engineering firm in Columbus, and he was good at it, at reading load and stress and the places where things were likely to fail. He was less skilled at applying any of this to himself. He had been divorced for 14 months from a woman named Claire, who had told him near the end that his problem was not that he didn't feel things, but that he documented them instead of living them. He had spent a year thinking she was wrong, and the last 2 months beginning to suspect she wasn't. His best friend was a woman named Nora Elias. She had been his best friend since they were in the same advanced calculus class in their junior year of college, which meant she had survived every version of him: the ambitious one, the impulsive one, the one who called her at 11 at night after his wedding, and then again, 14 months later after his divorce. She was 36. She was a hospital pharmacist. She had brown hair she wore in a low knot when she was working, and loose around her shoulders when she was off the clock, and she laughed at things most people didn't notice were funny, and she had been through her own quiet storm. A broken engagement 2 years ago to a man named Trevor, who turned out to be a significantly different person in his private life than his public one. They had dinner every other Wednesday. This was not a date. This was a standing arrangement that had existed for 3 years and that both of them would have described as friendship if anyone had asked, which people had stopped doing because the asking produced such identical and unremarkable answers. The joke happened on a Tuesday, not even a Wednesday. It happened on a Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon, over the phone, while Miles was reviewing stress calculations and Nora was on her lunch break. He had been at a company party the previous Friday where a well-meaning colleague named Pete had spent 40 minutes trying to set him up with Pete's dental hygienist. Miles was telling Nora this story with the enthusiasm of a man describing a minor municipal disaster. "I need a backup plan," he said, at the end of the story, "like a standing agreement. If we're both still single at 40, we just—" He made a gesture with his hand that Nora couldn't see over the phone. "We stop making it complicated." There was a pause. On a normal Tuesday, this pause would have lasted 1 second, and Nora would have said something dry and accurate that dissolved the moment. The pause lasted 4 seconds, then 6. Then Nora said, "Miles," and her voice had a quality in it that he had not heard before, or possibly had not been paying close enough attention to notice. Then she said, "I have to go. Lunch is done." And she was gone. He stared at the structural drawings on his screen. He thought about the pause. He reopened the calculation he had been reviewing and read the same line 6 times without absorbing it. He thought about the pause again. He texted her that evening. Just a question mark. She sent back, "Talk at dinner tomorrow?" He sent, "Sure." He set his phone face down on the counter and stood in his kitchen with the refrigerator humming and the particular silence of a man who has just realized he may have said something that was not, in any sense of the word, a joke. Nora arrived on Wednesday in a gray sweater and jeans with her hair down, which meant she was off the clock and present in the way she only was when she wasn't performing professional composure. She brought the bread from the bakery on the corner that they always split, and she set it on his kitchen table and sat down and looked at him in a way that was direct and slightly unbearable. "So," Miles said. "So," Nora said. "I said a thing yesterday." "You did." And then there was a pause. She looked at him. The kitchen lamp was on and the evening was coming through the window behind her, and she had her hands flat on the table on either side of the bread, and she said very quietly, "Miles, how long have you actually been thinking about this?" He opened his mouth. Nothing useful came out. "I made a joke," he said. "You make jokes when something is true and you're afraid of it," she said. "You've been doing it since second-year calculus. I've had 12 years of data." The silence in the kitchen was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that has substance, that means something is being measured carefully by both people simultaneously. Miles looked at Nora Elias. He looked at her the way he had not let himself look at her, which was to say completely. She did not look away. "Nora," he said. "Yeah. The pause yesterday. What was happening in the pause?" She took a breath, set both hands in her lap, looked at him with the expression of a woman who has prepared for a conversation and is deciding to stop preparing and just have it. "I was deciding whether to tell you something I've been managing for a while," she said. "And then I ran out of lunch break before I made the decision." Miles said nothing. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a lawnmower started up and quit almost immediately. You are the most important person in my life, Nora said. You have been for 12 years. I have watched you marry someone else, and I was happy for you because I wanted you to be happy, and then I watched the marriage fall apart, and I came to your apartment at midnight with bad takeout, and we didn't talk about any of the things I was actually feeling because that wasn't what you needed. She paused. And I am telling you this now because you accidentally opened a door, and I am tired of pretending I don't know it's there. Miles felt something shift in the architecture of the evening in a way his training was completely useless for measuring. He thought about 12 years. He thought about the 10 minutes after every wedding he had attended alone, standing near the exit with a glass of something cold, scanning the room for her. He thought about the night his marriage ended and the first call he had made, not to his brother, not to Greg from work, but to Nora, because she was the only person whose voice could make the rest of it quiet down. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked. "Because you were married," she said. "And then because you were in pieces. And then because I was afraid that what I felt was not what you felt, and I did not want to lose what we had by asking for something I wasn't sure was available." She looked at him steadily. "And also because you are the person who calls me a backup plan while clearly meaning the opposite, and sometimes people need to hear themselves say a thing out loud before they're ready to know they mean it." Miles was quiet for a long moment. The bread was still in its paper bag between them, untouched. He said, "Nora." She looked at him. He said, "I think I've been calling you a backup plan because I was afraid that if I called you what you actually are, I would ruin the only thing I had that was actually working." She looked at him. Her eyes were bright and absolutely dry, and she said, "Miles, I have been your plan A since second year calculus. I just didn't know how to submit the application." He laughed, which surprised both of them. It was a short, real laugh that broke the tension at the exact right moment, the way tension is supposed to break, not with drama, but with sudden relief that the worst anticipated thing turned out to be something else entirely. She smiled. The smile was the kind that reaches the eyes first and the rest of the face afterward, and he had seen it 10,000 times and was looking at it now as if through a different window. He asked if he could take her to dinner on Friday, not Wednesday dinner. Friday dinner, which was a different thing and they both knew it. She said yes. He walked her to the door at the end of the evening, and they stood in the doorway for a moment with the bread finally open on the table behind them and the evening doing its ordinary things outside. He asked if he could take her to dinner on Friday, not Wednesday dinner. Friday dinner, which was a different thing and they both knew it. She said yes. He walked her to the door at the end of the evening, and they stood in the doorway for a moment with the bread finally open on the table behind them and the evening doing its ordinary things outside. There was a moment just before she left where she turned back from the top step and looked at him in the lamplight. The wind moved her hair. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. Then she went down the steps, and he closed the door and stood with his back against it in the hallway, like a man who has just survived something and is still deciding what to call it. He did not sleep well that night. He lay in the dark, replaying the conversation in the methodical way he reviewed structural calculations, looking for the load-bearing points, the places where the weight was distributed. He kept arriving at the same conclusion: 12 years. He had stood 12 feet from the answer for 12 years and described it carefully and thoroughly as something else. He was a structural engineer. He located failure points for a living. The irony was not lost on him. At work the next day, his colleague Pete, the same Pete who had cornered him with the dental hygienist story, stopped by his desk around 10 to drop off a revised drawing and said without preamble, "You look different. Did something happen?" Miles told him the drawing looked fine. Pete persisted. Miles told him he was reviewing load calculations. Pete said, "You're definitely not reviewing load calculations," and left, which was about the most perceptive thing Pete had ever said. Miles texted Nora at noon. Just, "Are we okay?" She replied within 90 seconds, "We are more than okay." He stared at that message for a long time. He set his phone down. He picked it up. He read it again. He put it in his pocket and spent the rest of the afternoon being substantially more productive than he had been in months. "Miles," she said. "Yeah. Don't overthink it this time." "I'm a structural engineer," he said. "Overthinking is load-bearing." She shook her head at him. "Not this time," she said. And she went down the steps, and he watched her go, and the door was still warm from the light when he finally closed it. Friday dinner was at a small Italian place neither of them had tried before. They talked the way they always talked, about everything and nothing and the things underneath. But something in the frequency had shifted, like a signal clarified, and Miles noticed every part of it. how she stole half his bread, how she laughed at the waiter's overly elaborate description of the risotto, how she caught him looking at her and did not pretend she hadn't. After dinner, they walked to the park 3 blocks over. October, leaves on the ground making their dry, specific sound under their feet. The streetlights were on, and the park was mostly empty, and they walked without a destination until Nora stopped by the fountain and turned to face him. "You're about to overthink," she said. "I'm not," he said. "You have the face," she said. "I don't have a face." "Miles, you have a very specific face." He stopped. He looked at her in the lamplight, this woman who had 12 years of data on him, who had shown up at midnight with bad takeout, who had said his name over the phone with a quality he had never heard before, and then let him catch up in his own time. He said, "I'm not overthinking. I'm deciding." "Deciding what?" "Whether to do something that I should have done," he said, "at some point in the past 12 years. She looked up at him. Her expression was not soft exactly. Nora was not a soft person, and she would have found the description inaccurate. It was open, fully and deliberately open in a way she very rarely was with anyone. She said, "Well, I've been waiting a reasonably long time already." He kissed her beside a fountain in a park in October, while the leaves did their work on the pavement and the lamplight did its work on everything else. The kiss was not a revelation. It was a recognition, the feeling of something settling into the place it was always meant to occupy, quiet and correct and overdue. She pulled back slightly and looked at him with the specific expression she reserved for things she had been right about. "There it is," she said. "There it is," he agreed. They walked back to his car with her hand in his, which was different from the other 10,000 times they had walked to his car together, and also was not different at all, and that was somehow the most correct thing about it. 3 months after the park, they drove up to the lake house that Nora's parents owned in southern Ohio. 4 days over New Year's, cold and quiet, fire in the grate every evening. The particular intimacy of two people who have been best friends first and do not need to perform anything for each other. Miles spent the mornings drawing, and Nora read, and they argued about everything they usually argued about, and also some things they hadn't had the right to argue about before, and it was better for the argument. On the last night, sitting by the fire with snow coming down outside the window and the lake invisible in the dark, Nora said, "Can I ask you something?" "Always," he said. "When did you actually know, not the joke, before the joke?" He thought about it honestly, the way the question deserved. "The night after your engagement ended," he said. "You called me at midnight and you were so quiet and I drove 40 minutes to your apartment and you made tea and we didn't talk about Trevor at all. We just sat there and I thought, this is the person, this has always been the person. And then I thought, you're not available for that. And then I spent 2 more years carefully not thinking it again." The fire made its sounds. The snow continued at the window. Nora set her mug down and looked at him with 12 years of history in her face, and the particular expression she wore when something had confirmed what she already knew. "Miles," she said, "I called you first." He looked at her. "That night. Trevor had just left and I called you before I called anyone else. You didn't ask me why, you just drove 40 minutes. She looked at the fire. "I think we've both known for a long time. We were just being careful with something we didn't want to break." "Sometimes careful is just fear with better manners," he said. She turned to look at him. "Where did that come from?" "I don't know," he said. "It's just true." She leaned her head against his shoulder and the fire continued its work and the snow covered the lake outside and the room was warm in the way rooms are warm when the right people are in them together after a long time of almost being there. He proposed in the spring, in her kitchen, with the ring he had spent 3 weekends finding. A simple thing, elegant and specific, sized right because he had measured her other rings with a piece of paper when she wasn't looking, which she later said was both invasive and the most engineer thing he had ever done. She said yes before he finished the sentence and then told him he should have asked 12 years ago, and he said he had technically asked 14 months ago as a joke, and she said that absolutely did not count, and he agreed. They married the following October. Park near the fountain, 40 people, Nora's hair down, Miles reading from a card he had written, measured, and still did not read correctly because he got to the second paragraph and forgot the rest. What he said instead was, "You have been my plan A since before I was smart enough to read the plan." What would you have done if you realized your best friend had been the answer the whole time you were looking elsewhere? Would you have said something, or would you have kept managing it and hoping? And have you ever said something as a joke that you already knew, somewhere quiet and honest, was not a joke at all? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one landed for you, leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.